thank you for joining me on Leaving Babylon. It's Madeline. I'm here with another installment of Technocratic Takeovers, Part 2, and this one is called What the Dickens. I will be pinning the same video to a comment, a link to a comment, or in a comment, so that people who don't want the music in the background, they can go listen to it there. And hopefully that will help with some of the headaches that have been attributed to having the music in the background. So I want to start off by just, for anybody who hasn't been to my channel before or haven't watched a Technocratic Takeover, I did a part 1. You may want to go watch it. It's not required for this one, but there will be a little bit of correlation between part 1 and this one. So I think before we start, I do want to say a few things. So I want you to look forward to the end of this video because I have stumbled across actually 2 realizations emerged as I was doing this research, and totally unintentionally. I wasn't looking for these. One of them is potentially how they caused, and when I say they, so we're talking about technocratic takeovers, we're talking about an elite group of technocrats, what I would call them. People who took what was already existing, assumed ownership of it, and then began to re-architect the society in a format that they would benefit from. So that's the premise of this, but 2 of the takeaways are how they caused such widespread destruction. And if some of you have not accustomed yourself to the content around all the fires that happened over the last, I guess, I mean, they're still happening, but I would say probably over the last 300 years. I think 1666 is a good one to start with, the London fire, and then just go from there. There are pages that will give you a lot of information on the city fires. Pretty much every city in the world has been burned to the ground for the most part and then rebuilt or salvaged, and the salvaged part of it was used for like a decorative, purpose. So I would say one of the takeaways by the end of this will be how they really did it. In terms of the massive, we're talking San Francisco, 500 blocks worth of leveling of old architecture. So old world architecture. That architecture would have been absolutely stunning. We do have renditions of it. We do have depictions of it throughout various media. You can find that as well. And so how they did it, and I think we understand possibly why they did it, but we can talk about that. And then the other part of that is, following that, why did they liquefy the earth? And why did they cover up basically about 18 feet's worth in most cases, but it could be up to like 2 full levels of city have been covered in mud. And it's been worldwide. So there's been cataclysms that have been caused one way or the other. In every area of the world, you could go to your local city, your local town even, and probably see evidence of what we would call the mud flood. And so I'm going to give a hypothesis at the end of this on why they would have done that. Because I've heard a lot of, okay, this has happened, and that a lot of people agree as to, yes, we understand there's been a mud flood, and yes, we can see evidence of that, but I don't see a lot of people asking why. Why did they do that? And another thing we could talk about is how, but I think the why has been a big question, and it just kind of emerged as I was going through this. So I'll tell you about that as well. So hang on to the end. I didn't intend doing that part of the research, but these kind of just emerged out of the fog, which is very apt and pun intended, because Charles Dickens gives us a very foggy depiction in his writing of the Victorian era. So with that said, I believe Charles Dickens, and I'm not going to go into the boring part of his story. I think he was, he had kind of as they all do, they have this poor story that they started with. But he became an absolutely prolific writer and very widely published. Probably one of the most well-known authors in the entire world ever. He was a spellcrafter. He spellcrafted our imaginations regarding the Victorian era. He gave us this understanding. If you ever read his work, and you've probably seen it on TV, he influenced our understanding of what the Victorian era was like. Okay, so he made it very, very impoverished. But first, so I want to just tell you how, these authors were put in these positions to write for a purpose. And the purpose was to influence us, to influence our understanding. And as I say, most of these books have actually become movies. Again, so the people who don't read, they can also be influenced by his imagery. So you may be surprised once you see what he's taught us. The first and probably most important, not the first, but one of the most well-known stories he wrote was A Christmas Carol. And we'll all recognize Scrooge, the main character. Scrooge has been depicted as a grumpy, miserable man. But as you start looking at media, it's important with the millennial reign, post-millennial reign mindset. Understand that the people that control the media, they usually depict the grumpy, miserable people as such because they want you to hate the characteristics of that person and that type of person. And what was Scrooge against? He was actually against Christmas. And I do want you to know that there was a lot of people against Christmas, and most of them were Christians back in the day. And I do believe that a lot of this early fiction was written to influence the way that people would have been thinking traditionally about things. So get people to love Christmas. How do you do that? You make the person who is opposing Christmas look like a really miserable, penny pinching, terrible person, and then you introduce obviously the character that you want them to love, right? And people who oppose Christmas, it's become a cult in and of itself, kind of. I'm not going to get into the Christmas debate, but essentially, if you oppose Christmas, you can pretty much be, society will look at you like this, as if you are this person. You are just miserable, you hate life, and you are a mean person. So public shaming in the name of something good. Isn't that weird? Okay. Or what they want you to perceive as good. And then they bring in, so Charles Dickens brings in this character who is called Visitor 3, and we know that Scrooge always looks very pathetic and miserable and weak and not very nice. And then this character comes in and he offers bounty. He offers to light up this old house with all this great stuff. But isn't it interesting, his pose there? So he has this light. Why is he carrying a torch in a house? Just saying. But he's carrying this torch right up high. And some of you may already be able to recognize the pose, the right hand up, the left hand down, this torch here, and then this garment, and even the way he's sitting is very reminiscent of something else. So here you see he's influencing us right away. And I would say this garment, the hand up, the hand down, and the torch above. It's the same picture. And I don't want to leave that other picture up there too long, but the point being is that our thoughts and our emotions and our sentiments are influenced by this imagery. And we don't even know what it is we're on board with. And here's more. And so really, one of the earliest, most influential or impactful stories we learn as children and in our society is that of the Christmas Carol, the Scrooge. And we also get on board, without realizing it, with other myths and ancient storylines. We also are introduced to, again, Victorian England through his stories. And we are made to see it in a certain way. So the whole scene here is very impoverished. These children live on the streets. They're penny pinching, pocket picking. And we have, people dressed in very, I would say, working class clothing. And they seem to walk around all day with baskets and buckets, just collecting things to take home. And it seems like everyone was sick, everyone was weak, everyone was poor. And that's the sentiment he wants us to have. We also know that the Victorian times, one of the main themes is the orphan, especially the orphan boy. But we also had Orphan Annie and Anne of Green Gables and a few other stories about orphans as well. Again, the way that Charles Dickens wants us to feel about this time, and I'm going to challenge that in this video. What he wants us to feel about this time is that it is very manual labor based. It's very, hard living, difficult times. He also introduced us to the French Revolution. So his fictional writing about the French Revolution became much of common understanding of what the French Revolution actually looked like. So imagine creating pictures in your head, in people's heads, about a certain time in history and what that would look like. And so you tell this story, you call it fiction, but somehow we inherit the sentiments of those fictional tales. So it's almost like the Trojan horse that gets into our head, these stories that are essentially lies. I mean, they're not true. Oh, obviously the French Revolution may have been true, but the telling of them and the characters and the people in these stories aren't true. So this is like spellcrafting. And I believe authors have done this, fictional authors have done this, and they've planted like a general consensus about certain deeper meanings of things. And so, the imagery of the guillotine, for example, all these stories are very, through the writing and through the imagination, they become almost like a truth in a way to your mind. And we learned about social struggle, so class struggle. The very impoverished poor class were being oppressed by these elites, these bourgeoisie. And it also gets you on board with this feeling of like you join the revolution, because the revolution is actually for the real people, the good people, the poor people. And therefore, revolution is a good thing. And we've talked about revolution, especially the French Revolution, in part 1 and part 2 of the Loosing of Satan series. And I find these images very close to what I was reading at the time in his books. So you have these sick people, these poor people, very sad, everything's dark. And you have this really helpful person just putting their hand in their coat like that, because that's a really helpful thing to do when somebody's sick and, obviously overseeing the situation, keeping an eye on things. Now, the Victorian times were actually a time of great wealth for Britain and a lot of the other European countries. These people, known as kings and queens, monarchs, this was Victoria. I believe these people came out of the woodwork after Jesus Christ left. Not left, but he exited this realm from, you know, where we live, and obviously Satan would have been loosed, and there was people that came in and started taking over, probably battling each other to a certain extent for the rights to land. So I think there would have been a huge land grab, taking all of the infrastructure with it. And I don't see a lot of affection or humanity in this stare by these people. And yet they just put their statues everywhere. You know, every corner you turn in some towns, there's a statue of somebody who, you know, these impressions as we walk around in our daily life, we have these impressions that these people must be honored. They must be better than us. You know, we're just down here, they're way up there, even on this pedestal, literally. And so the way that they do this, the way that they elevate themselves over the rest of us, is just astonishing when you really just step back from it and you look and you say, okay, these people, and you see it in the light of the millennial reign as well, you can see that these people would have just been kind of almost waiting to jump in and start getting their hands on all of the property, and then set themselves up as the rulers and the leaders. Well, Jesus Christ is my king. I don't know about you, but these people aren't my kings and queens. So I want to talk a little bit about the infrastructure that they took over. I believe they took over, and they have been aggressively and progressively dismantling what they came into. I don't even want to call it inheritance. It's not their inheritance, but what they came into control of and how they restructured it. So last time when we were looking in part 1 at the book that I believe was either predictive or revelatory. There's 2 views on that book. This is one of the images from the book, and it shows these pipes going through the countryside. I expect this is something that could have been very real. I haven't made my mind up, so this is also obviously part of research, is you have to research to find out what you think about things, right? So when I present these views, I'm not dogmatically putting my stake in the ground, because I think it's important to have conversation. I think it's important to present ideas and just sit with them and also build on them. And there's a point as well where you can realize that maybe it's like this, not quite like that. So you can, you know, this is just part of learning, and I think presenting these is hopefully helpful. And the other picture that we looked at in that book was actually the underground of Paris. So I think there is something that's real here, and we're going to look at some stuff. So this picture tells me that they had delivery systems for everything, but it was all underground. We have here tele, which I think is telephone. Maybe these were telephone boxes. I know that in Europe there were traditionally telephone boxes around so you could make a phone call. We have lumiere, which would be the lights. There's tube, and all of these other, these are all in French. So I guess the point being is that when we look at the ground level, we don't see any wires. It's all very clean looking. You know, there's a telephone box, there's lights. This almost looks like it has some maybe steam tubing around it, this building there. And when we do look at the very old buildings, that had sophisticated, I don't know, steam piping, steam heating, steam network in them. This is what we see. This is extremely sophisticated. This almost looks like the inside of a computer, like a network. Extremely sophisticated. And it would have had to been engineered very, very meticulously. All the valves and the pressures and the heat and I'm not a plumber, but there's a lot to that, clearly. And so looking at this map here, and I'll just tell you what this map is. This map is actually a distribution map of Europe of natural gas. So we're going to talk about natural gas. It's really important to realize that whatever infrastructure was there before these, I don't know, elite technocrats took over, they have taken it and they have profited off of it, but they've also re-architected it. This map here is the natural gas pipeline network of Europe. And I believe it was already there. I don't think it's new. I think it was there throughout the millennial reign. I believe it was natural, as in it was coming from natural sources, just coming out of the ground, and I'll show you a little bit more of that. This is the pipeline in the USA. Nearly 1 million miles of natural gas pipeline. Again, it's like the rail system. I don't believe that it was put in the 1800s. I just don't think they had the people. I don't think they had the capability to do it. They didn't have the machinery. They didn't have the all they did was they had what was there. Here's a very old gas works, which would have been connected to the natural gas network. This is in Berlin, Germany. Very, very old. This is old. Like, we're talking old world, millennial old. Millennial reign old. And this is this is like from the 1600s, I think. And yet you can see there's piping. Might be the 1700s, you know? And this would have been inside one of these old gas works. This one is from the Czech Republic. And they have just pretty much shut them down over time. So we're talking about an aggressive decommission project, I think, which has been ongoing for a long time. This is in Sydney, Australia. This one looks a little different because the gas is actually under the water. So the sources of natural gas can be anywhere. But when they find them, they have to, have a method of extracting. So these towers here are extracting the gas. This is in Seattle, Washington, in the USA. It looks very steampunk, but it was a gasworks. And I think, again, millennial reign, I think this was all here when they moved in. Now, this is an old, what's called a gasometer. And these are just fascinating. They've been decommissioning these as well. These would have been the containers that held the natural gas. So the gas would have come in and it would have filled up, and like on the inside of this circular structure. And it would have been kind of a gas supply for the day for the local area. They had them all over Europe, and I'll show you more of these. There's a lot of still functioning ones, but they're actually progressively decommissioning them. So they've gone way back. This looks like a millennial reign structure to me. And here's an old drawing of how, just a sort of an architectural engineering drawing of how the units would have functioned. The valves and the various conduits. And that's an old world structure. And this is one, believe it or not. This is in Germany, I believe. and sometimes they actually looked like churches. But you can see all of these chimneys and then the piping. So that when we go back to that drawn picture that we started with, I believe there was a very sophisticated network of piping that was distributing gas all over the world, actually. And we'll get more into that. But this looked almost like a church. But here you can see there's the gasometer at the back there. This is a gasworks in Chicago. You can see the two gasometers there. Europe, and often they had these, so there's two gasometers, and then they had these chimneys as well. Believe it or not, this is in Berlin, and this would have been taken right after the Second World War. They tell us that this is where Adolf Hitler was using as a bunker, and you can see like this is all bombed around it. This is all pretty destroyed here. Something happened for sure. I'm not sure I buy the story itself, but that was definitely a gasometer there. And these, I believe, are in the Netherlands. And I'm showing you all of these because I want you to really grasp how big this network was, which they've been dismantling. So here's a gaswork. Rastenburg, I'm not sure where that is. Kalamazoo, Michigan. This was actually listed as a gaswork, so I'm not sure if that's the right listing. And again, just more, I think this is in Europe. This one's in Dublin. And I just want to quickly show you how they fill up and empty. So I used to drive past these on my way to work when I lived in England. I lived there for 20 years. And I used to see these around, and I used to drive past one. And some days it would be fully empty when it's kind of at the end of the day, I think. Or was it in the morning? Either at the end of the day or the morning, it would be empty. And then the opposite end of the day, it would be like this, like it would be more full. And so that's just an idea of how they work. So they're like they're a container that fills up and empties. So here we're going to see a little scene in Doctor Who. It's called The Undead, and Charles Dickens is featured as the main character, but it also incorporates the theme of gaslighting, natural gas. And he was historically, or notably, a writer of kind of haunted stories, so he incorporated a lot of ghosts and things like that. So just if you don't like ghosts, there's kind of a ghosty scene in this.
But there was nothing particular at all about the knocker on the door of this house. But let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look. It looked like... Oh, my Lord. It looked like that. What phantasmagoria is this? That's more like it. I beg you, it is a lantern trick. Trickery.
There she is, sir!
Sea larch! Oh, the blooming world can see that!
So there's actually a connection between what they're considering to be kind of a haunting, and then the gas in the lights. And this would have been the natural gas that would have been naturally occurring in Victorian England. And so they're drawing this correlation, but they're also making it very scary. So I think over the years, what I'm trying to display here is the way that the media, they use media to make us afraid of certain ideas and concepts. And there's certain aspects to gas that are obviously not healthy, but they're really trying the scare tactics here, which they use a lot. This is actually an image of the gas lighting, how they produce the gas to light the lamps all along the streets. So this was a sophisticated, engineered delivery system. And here we have what they used to have would be the lights along the street, and they would be plumbed with gas. So you have to imagine that beneath all of these lights was a sophisticated system, an infrastructure that would have been connected to all of these gas supplies. And here we have the gasometers as well as the light. And if you talk to older people in Britain and probably Europe, they will tell you they remember times when the gas lighters used to come out and light the lamps. And they had that job, and I just think that's lovely. Here we see pictures of depictions of not just the lamps on the street, but there looks like there's lights coming out of that building there. So the plumbing and the infrastructure that was actually in all of the architecture and all of the roadworks and everywhere, and we even see those iron balconies and the beautiful lights. Everything was so beautiful. You can see there. And so this is where I start challenging the Charles Dickens imagery. I don't believe that it was all, grubby and impoverished and manual, because when we start looking at what we see in actual pictures, it's a totally different story. And so I do want us to start challenging what we've read in fiction books against what do we actually know about history. And you can see the streets were very clean, the lights were being lit, and it just seemed to me as well that people weren't as greedy. Here's a beautiful light plumbed into a building. I imagine that was gas at some point. And even just the texture of the building is so lovely. This is Paris. I expect it's the exposition in Paris. And just the very clean energy approach. So we had the gas lighting, all these beautiful structures just had lighting, and it would have been coming from a natural source. So as long as the plumbing was there, it would have been free. Free to light your streets, free to light your homes, free for cooking. And then these people decided that they didn't like that very much. And since they were the new controllers, they wanted people to start paying them for some of this. How dare we have free lighting and free heat? And just some more, and here's some ladies lighting the tracks. Again, I want to say clearly that it's likely and very, provable that this network was across the United States just as much as the rail network was or is. and Europe and all over the world. We have the expos that show us so much light. If you look down on the streets, you'll see lights. You know, it was a very, very brightly lit up. All of these expos were very brightly lit. And we have historical reference that, you know, these lights would have provided a lot of light at nighttime for people. And just another image of kind of an industrial setting, and just the cleanliness. Oh, this is probably at the Crystal Palace, but this is a very, even just the design of the machines themselves. It's almost science fiction based, but these are real, and I believe these could have been oscillators. Who knows? But the free energy would have been powering a lot of the society. Included at the expos. Not San Francisco. The Columbia World's Fair in Chicago. Buffalo. And this is at the Columbian Expo in Chicago as well. And this is actually Coney Island, New York. So just to go back quickly, I want to talk about more of these, the gas network. This is one of the oldest in Europe. This is from a place called Tegel, I think, in Germany. It might be Germany, it might be the Netherlands. This is in Boston. And this is in Europe somewhere. And I'm just going to go through some of these pictures. This is in Vienna. They've sort of renovated these for apartments, which I think kind of look cool. But yeah, those were originally the gasometers. This one's in Warsaw, and this is just a Victorian style one that, you know, those things were built to last. They were not going to fall apart, and I think they were older than the Victorian era. I think they are very, very old. And they even made them beautiful, even though they were a functional industrial design. You know, it was designed for engineering kind of thing, but they even still made them look pretty, which is lacking in our society today. Now I want to show you this article here, The Natural Gas History and Modern Times. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. So the natural gas sprung from the Earth's crust is utterly lost in the mists of time. Natural gas has been a mystery for mankind long before knowing what it is, where it comes from, under what conditions. For example, it was known that lighting can ignite natural gas escaping from under the Earth's crust, causing fires to erupt along with their consumption. It seems that most early civilizations have been overwhelmed by these flames that have become, over time, the source of many myths and superstitions. So going back to the old springs, we find out that around 500 BC, the Chinese were the first to use natural gas, accidentally found, well, we don't know that, as byproducts of salt extraction works from salt water by boiling it. Moreover, they have also found a way to transfer the gas, reaching the surface of the earth through rough pipes made of bamboo shoots, blah, blah, blah. And then they tell us that in the 1700s, the UK sold for the first time coal-derived gas. So manufactured gas, illuminating the streets of Baltimore. So they got this in the US. So now they're weaving this story, and I don't know if this is intentional on this website, but we're told that, oh yes, now we've created the whole system in the US or the UK. But that's just fitting it into the timeline box that they want us to think in, you see. So this is where they start, the narrative starts to fall apart. We know that gas is naturally occurring, and we use it for cooking and heating. And they talk about there's wells in Indiana, from the wells in the center of Indiana to Chicago, etc. So they're identifying that there was an existing, they're identifying that there is this natural resource in the US. So that was the point of this. But I also wanted to say that they started to derive natural gas from coal. So they started moving away from these deposits that they had been piping it from, and creating a natural gas from coal. So why would they do that? Well, I think it's possible that if you want to control the resources, you have to actually manufacture the resources. If it's a naturally occurring resource, how do you control it? So you have to plumb all of your network to something that you can gauge, you can meter it, and you can charge for it. So I think that's why they moved to coal in the first place. This website here just tells about, it sort of gives a little bit more of where and how they find these natural deposits of natural gas. And so it just says conventional natural gas reservoirs form when gas travels from organic rich rock and becomes trapped by a layer of impermeable rock above it. And producers can access the gas by drilling vertical wells. And we saw these on the Sydney picture where they had it in the water, but they were obviously drilling down to a natural gas source. And shale gas would be considered like a natural gas source. And so, you know, these are known locations, these are known practices, the infrastructure would have already been there. But now we have these eco-experts who are going to tell us that we have to stop using coal as natural gas. Well, they moved us to coal in the first place, you see. So they moved us from these natural deposits onto a coal-based system. And now they're telling us we have to stop using coal because it's dirty. So we can either continue relying on the fossil fuels. So first they tell us these are fossil fuels, which is a story. We have to stop relying on fossil fuels to power the country, or we can invest in greener alternatives and for energy. And then it's talking about how the government will execute the transition, and it sells this whole story. Okay. And so we're being told that in the first case, we know that there were natural resources, but they wanted us to start using coal for some reason because, well, they can control that. And now they're telling us we have to get off coal and we have to go towards something clean. Well, there was something clean in the beginning, so. And I'm just going to go through a few more of this is in Germany. This was an old gasworks. Northampton in the UK. These are Germany. And you can see here they're demolishing now these gasometers. So these gas containers that were being used to power communities all over the earth have been progressively being decommissioned and torn down. And this is in Warsaw. This is just more of the gasworks in Warsaw. So when we talk about Charles Dickens, just keeping the thread of Charles Dickens and what they want us to think about the Victorian era, we're building this understanding now that the network of the infrastructure of resources was clean, it was powerful, it was beautiful. And when we look at pictures like this, we can start to ask ourselves, why do we think that why do we think we've come so far ahead when actually there's evidence to show us that the past was way more technologically advanced, way more. You know, these underground tunnels for water, sewage, whatever it was, these were built with sophistication. They were built to last. They weren't built by, very weak, dying, struggling, poor people. They were built by a society that was very well organized, well funded. I would say probably, they had each other's best interest in mind. They weren't grabbing for cash, these kinds of things. We're taught to think badly about gas, so we get these images of these people walking around with gas masks during the wars. And when we see the Moscow Industrial Exposition, it's so clean and it's so interesting. Like, it doesn't look like anything we have now, does it? These machines, this kind of layout. And obviously highlighting here in the red squares, I think that these are kind of oscillation units. They were using a lot of free energy in the manufacturing process. This here is called a furnacular. I believe. They even had these. So this is a cable system. So these would be, so there would be a cable and then kind of steps that would pull these up and down the hill. So if you were trying to get to this castle or church, whatever it is, and you had to go up there, you would take this little cable pulley system, which could have just been powered by steam. Some have said that these depictions of the original tube systems were driven by or powered by magnets, things like that. And I tend to agree that if we're seeing this kind of sophistication, I don't see why these drawings would be impossible. And I do think that the power sources have been changed. And now they're selling us on this kind of electric battery system, which is, if you look at what they do to the earth to get the cobalt and the lithium, this is not a renewable energy source. The earth doesn't grow back that way. And so, we've gone from natural energy sources like gas and ether and steam to digging big holes in the earth, because for some people there's just not enough money to satisfy their greed. So I want to talk a little bit now about what we would consider to be fireplaces, chimneys, that kind of thing. And I think it's worth saying that these likely were not used in the way that we think they were used. And there are some clues here. So, just the ornateness of these. If you were burning, for heating this house, if you were burning wood in there, you wouldn't have white marble all around the outside of this. It would become very sooty. And you wouldn't have a nice floor, and you wouldn't have it just open like that. So while the brick may have been added and this little door to make it look like it was a fireplace, it would have also done damage to any design here on this outer piece. And not a practical source of heat anyway, but some would say that these items here at the front would have been receptors of some kind of free energy, maybe like an ether energy, something along those lines. And we see here again, we see this beautiful, I'm not going to go into the imagery on there, even though it's tempting, but that is not a fireplace. It's wide open for one thing, and they had to put this little stove in there just to kind of give the impression that it was made for heating. Maybe they are heating the room that way now. But again, there's these two items here that could potentially have been used for something like receiving a free energy source. And this is King Louis the 16th's fireplace, one of his fireplaces, and they called it a chimney. And so I don't see how that would work for just putting logs and getting a load of soot in this room and smoke. Again, these two things here, I don't even know what they're called. So here's another one. And again, you wouldn't put a picture above a fire source, like an actual sooty burning interior, because your picture, and if this is wood, it would all get damaged from that, potentially. And again here, and we see these two things here, and we see this like an iron plate across the middle. And just some more examples here. And I think this one is indicating that this plate may have received heat and become hot and maybe radiated heat out of this area here into the room. So it might have been more of a radiation, like a radiator type contraption. And it's possible that they just removed, so if that was there originally, it's possible they just removed whatever was here originally. You see. This is, I believe, the Rockefeller mansion, one of their mansions. And, you know, just to note that there's wood all around here. And logically, it just seems unlikely. One of our favorite chimney people in the media as children would have been this guy here from Mary Poppins. His name is Bert, which actually sounds like burnt. And I think that's intentional, because I do believe that his character is telling us something. They use characters to drop hints. And so if you just give me a minute. So here's one of the scenes from the Mary Poppins movie. And I can't play the music because I'll get a copyright ban. But as you see, he's dancing along with the children. I think he's singing Chim Chimmery, Chim Chim Chiroo. Good luck will rub off when I shake hands with you. And they're dancing along. And they're stepping in time with him. And he's all covered in soot. And there's a guy in a black hat. And so just walking through some of the imagery of this. These are not his children, I should point out. They literally just met. And somehow they got left with him by the nanny, I think. And he's, you know, taking them home. He's over-exaggerating all of his movements to get them to do what he's doing. Because it's so easy to influence children, isn't it? And so they just do what he's doing. He's singing a happy song, he's dancing, and there's music. And now they've come home and their mother's totally unaware of them. She doesn't know where they are. Nobody cares. These children are just kind of left to their own devices, and they want him to stay because he's so much fun. And now they're just going to have a little interaction, and nobody wants to take care of the children, so she asks the chimney sweep if he will take care of them. He's a little bit shocked there by the suggestion, but she doesn't care. They're her children, but who cares? I have to go do more important things. And I think this tells me a little bit about the time of the Victorian times, when women's rights were becoming, you know, this big campaign. So the suffragette movement was becoming a growing political movement, and women were actually starting to leave the home. They were feeling like, you know, motherhood just wasn't their thing, and they wanted to be like, you know, be like men in terms of earning their money. And you know, the narratives that people like Charles Dickens wrote were very much showing this struggle between men and women, you know, the poor and the rich and all of this. So I think there was always this drive to push women out of the home. And so we see a little bit of that here. And in this scene, I want to talk about a little bit of the imagery. So we have Mary Poppins, who is standing in for the parents raising the children. And they're on a roof, which is a very dangerous place for children to be, actually. So teaching them these kinds of don't go with the flow. You know, Mary Poppins, although she had a very traditional way of speaking, she was like a school mistress, and she, you know, the children trusted her because her parents had hired her, and she did lots of neat tricks. But now she's taking them on a very kind of dangerous journey, not even looking at them, whether they get across on this roof or not. And they're going through, and one thing I want to highlight here is just all the smoke. So we're starting to see, and we're getting imprinted with this idea of Victorian. Again, the Victorian era is very smoky. Lots of charcoal. They do this using these little tricks of like this black all over their faces, you know, this, all of this smoke, and she's leading them up into very, very difficult, you know, very dangerous spots, actually. And if the children had done this on their own, they might have actually died. But we have to be able to see how smoggy the UK was. We have to be able to see London with all the smog. But she carries on. She's going to go higher and higher and higher. She's just going to take them on more of an adventure into the regions that they can't even imagine. You know, they've been stifled. And I want to draw attention to the stairs because I think the Masonic imagery is here as well. Even the Tower of Babel imagery. Also have to point out that Mary Poppins wears a red dress, which is biblically the woman in red is that, you know, she's kind of, they're signaling who this character is. And she has a male counterpart there as well. And I'm going to do a whole episode on Mary Poppins because it's a very occult story. And as with all things that we've got through media, there's always the occult layer that's written into it. This particular scene is very much about making things dirty. So if you think about this on the infrastructure level, society had free, clean energy, millennial reign. Now, let's say what I believe is that Satan was loosed and he's taking over the infrastructure and he's going to make everything very dirty. It's going to be a very dirty place. That could be on one level, it could indicate the deception, the dirtiness of deception, the sin that will come from that dirtiness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the character of the chimney sweep, and especially this one that was portrayed in the Mary Poppins movie. Mentioned that Mary Poppins is the woman in red, and I believe that the chimney sweep represents the devil. In one of the scenes, he comes through, I can't remember which one it is, but they go in and the children's mother asks him to clean out the chimney after asking if he would take care of the children for her. So he goes in and he looks up the chimney, and this is what he said. "Chim chimmery, up where the smoke is all billered and curled, tween pavement and stars is the chimney sweep world. Where there's ardly no day and ardly no night, there's things half in shadow and halfway in light. On the rooftops of London, coo, what a sight." And I still remember the scene where they were laughing hysterically for no reason. They were just laughing. But now maybe we understand why these people actually laugh, because they are getting away with an awful lot. And we see these pictures as well of politicians all gathered together just busting a gut laughing about something. And it could be that they're just getting away with so much and nobody's even questioning them. Something else, another theme that emerged as I was looking at this was that concept of dancing with the children through danger and getting them to go against the tradition, go against the principles of maybe how they had been raised. Their parents, in this story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, their parents had tried to call them back, but the children could not be called back. The music and the gaiety and the way that they were so into, this kind of, this entertainment, if you will, caused them to be never seen again. Think about that on a level of like society and how, let's say in this time of great deception, music has been a huge gateway for people to be leaving the path of righteousness, leaving the path of our fathers, leaving the path of tradition, and I would say, the narrow path, walking with Jesus. These entertainers have come along and they have actually guided the younger generations away from not just their families, but from the beliefs of their forefathers, which in most cases has been a Christian background. And here we see a close connection with, we always have this kind of Apollo figure, and then we'll have the female consort in most of the countries. And so Uncle Sam in Colombia would be 2. And here they're shown with all these little people dancing and having a really, really fun time while they get their work done in the Capitol buildings of the world. And just to make the point that I truly see this archetype as Satan, and, you know, being called Bert and burnt. Satan was scorched, possibly when he was when he fell like lightning from heaven and was cast to the earth. And yeah. And again, so these themes of the energy now being dirty, you know, our society is now being dirtied by these deceptions, by this incoming takeover of our heating and our cooking and our lighting and the way that we do things. You know, even steam energy was a very clean energy, but now we're all covered in soot. We're covered in this, you know, and these are some old chimneys, which I think, you know, if you live in a city with some old buildings, there's still some of these around. I've seen some. And part of this free energy network would have been right on top of the old chimneys, or, you know, they would have been gathering free energy as oscillation. And so connecting the ether into the house. And very decorative as well. They were beautiful. And I'll talk more about steeplejacks in another episode because that's quite a big topic. But this is just to show you the structure of these things, especially on top. I think this is on top of the Salt Lake City Cathedral, possibly. And this would be a depiction of how they might work. So you'd have the resonator here, and you'd have an antenna, another resonator, and another antenna, and then these here on either side, which would collect the resonator frequencies and activating ether. When we look at very, very old pipe networks, I don't know how anyone could look at this and think that this was rudimentary. I think this is very sophisticated. I think that the old world had a complete understanding of how to extract and deliver free gas. And these are the pipelines around Europe, the natural gas pipelines. So when we look at the pictures from that book that we covered in part 1, this is not totally out of the question. And I believe the millennial reign would have been a very clean environment that provided people with all of the free, clean energy that they would have needed. And here's some very old pipes. They were made of lead, and they're actually replacing, for many years now, been replacing all the lead pipes. And these are just some examples of really, really old pipe networks. So here we go, modernization, laying, or replacement of old pipes, repair or work of water main department of housing and communal services. Here's old lead piping. That looks like inside a cathedral. And this is in Pompeii. And here we just see this kind of new copper and the old lead. Underground pipes. And where I'm going with this is my final hypothesis, so stick with me. And these are old, this is lead pipe used in ancient civilizations. And the steam alone that was produced for heating big buildings. We still see these in buildings that haven't been destroyed yet. So beautiful. These sophisticated steam or whatever these are, these might be pneumatic. Just absolutely stunning. And I noticed in this old building, there's just a pipe there, which I'm wondering if that was behind something that was gathering frequency. But it says here, we are saving beautiful parts from a good past for a good, bright looking future. Well, it looks to me like they're demolishing it, so I don't care what their signs say. Many of you may have seen this picture before. And I just point out the holes down here could have been part of some kind of delivery system of resources such as gas, steam, whatever. Could also be drainage, but I just thought that picture looked helpful in that way. And then this is just a very old pipe, so terracotta would have been used as well. And the last part of this demonstration video is that getting back to the mud flood. Okay, now most of us, again, we're probably aware of the mud flood. We've seen a lot of pictures showing that there was a mud flood, and also showing cities that were almost completely clean. There's no people, you know. So let's imagine that, going back to that clip of Doctor Who where they run out of the building and then it explodes behind them because they've let the gas into the building, and then someone's just lit, well, the lady struck a match. So let's imagine that they blew up the buildings. We're talking 500 blocks worth of buildings in San Francisco. They said it was caused by an earthquake. But for some reason it destroyed 500 blocks worth of old architecture buildings. So let's blow the buildings up, along with the pipes perhaps that were connected underneath those buildings. But if you have an infrastructure underneath, the only way to truly cover it up so that people don't know about it, can't access it, can't maintain it, cannot get to the natural gas that's down there or the other resources, is you cover it in mud. You just fill it up. All those tunnels that were there for those resources can just be covered up. So I think that's my hypothesis, is why they did the mud flood, was to bury the evidence of the old world infrastructure of free energy. Like, they had to deal with what was under the ground, but they also had to deal with the spires and the tops of the buildings. They could still use the buildings themselves, and they were very pretty, so they wanted to keep them, but they had to deal with underground as well as what was on the buildings. So if you're talking free energy being piped in from natural gas, you would also, you'd have to deal with that, you know. So there would have, I believe that these times of flooding, especially the liquefaction of the soil to fill in those bottom layers of the cities. And this is Paris. I'm just showing you pictures of 1910 when they completely flooded. Well, I say they. Paris had a huge flood in 1910. And we see this around the world. There's actually images of people floating around in boats in lots of cities. And then beyond that, there's all this evidence of those lower levels, even in my city. I have pictures, so many pictures of this happening. So this is one thing, but then tying it back to Charles Dickens, he wrote it's called the Mud Fog Papers, and it's allegedly proceedings of a fictional society, the Mud Fog Society for the Advancement of Everything, a parody of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. And having read a little bit of it, it talks about fog and mud and these people kind of living in this town called Mudfog. And what I find, like just the name of it to start with, is it makes me wonder if when they flooded everything and they covered everything in mud, was that part of the reason why we had so much fog? Because it would have been very damp underground. You know what I'm saying? There would have been a lot of dampness under that layer, that new layer of the street. So if you have all that water and all that wet down there, and then you have depictions of London being very foggy all the time, or, you know, certain cities, and I know there's certain areas of cities that get very foggy. And it may have been back in the Victorian era that was all just drying out. Like that was all just kind of settling down and, yes, foggy. So maybe it just feels like there's something there that we need to investigate a little bit more. But I wanted to put it out there that it's possible that all of these floodings were to cover up the infrastructure that was below, which would have been your free energy networks. And I'm guessing they would have dug out the things that they needed to continue to use and access. And then they dealt with the rest of what was in the buildings by gutting out the buildings. They're still doing that. There's still operations ongoing to let old buildings go derelict, and then once they're derelict, they get written off and they have to be renovated. But what they do when they renovate them is they pretty much gut them right out, and then they restructure them on the inside. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of that ongoing over the years, and so I just wanted to put that out there. But I think we'll leave it here for the day. I thank you for joining me. I thank you that we can talk about these things and discuss. I always appreciate everyone's input into these. So if you think of anything that's also related, I'm sure there's a lot of intersecting ideas that come into this as well. I haven't, I don't want to make this too long, so I've been trying to condense everything a little bit, but I hope that it's been informative and that we can kind of see our way through this puzzle. It's kind of like a mosaic. You put little pieces in, and then you step back and you can see a picture forming, and that's sort of how I see this. So thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed sharing it with you. And so we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.